Ever since human beings have been fighting each other, we've been obsessed with one specific problem. How do I hit the guy trying to kill me from further away than he can hit me? And do it efficiently. The first time someone picked up a stone and threw it at skull, that was the day when artillery was born. Nearly everything humanity has ever built to move something from point A to point B efficiently, the wheel, the road, the rocket, and everything in between has either been used in, derived for, or built exclusively for war. What is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
We cannot forget the ancient military adage that has outlasted every empire that ignored it. If you want peace, prepare for war. And preparation for war can only happen in peacetime. That's exactly what the Pakistan Armed Forces have been doing before and after May 2025. Today we are talking about Pakistan Army Artillery, the SH-15, also known by its Chinese military name, the PCL-181, and the controversy currently surrounding it. I'm Qasim and you're watching Radar Mode on Pakistan Connect. Let's get into it. Before we get into Pakistan specifically, it is worth answering a question a lot of viewers never think of. Why does artillery still matter in an age of stealth fighters, cruise missiles, and armed drones? The answer is economics. A single air-to-ground precision munition or a cruise missile can cost anywhere from tens to thousands to well over $1 million per shot. And it requires an aircraft, a pilot or an operator, an entire logistics and maintenance chain just behind it, just to deliver one warhead. A 155mm artillery shell costs a tiny fraction of that, and a single battery of 6 guns can put dozens of shells on a target area within minutes, sustained for as long as the ammunition holds out. Ballistic and cruise missiles remain unmatched for precision, range, and strategic signaling. That's why Pakistan uses Fatah rockets and Al-Fatah missiles for the highest value, longest range targets. But for the actual grinding, sustained work of a border war, suppressing an enemy position, breaking up a troop formation, denying the enemy the ability to move, artillery remains the most cost-effective way any army on earth reaches out and touches the other side. That's why war after war after war, century after century, it's the artillery that gets there first and stays the longest. That obsession with range and volume produced some genuinely monstrous engineering in the first half of the 20th century. Germany's Big Bertha, a 420mm siege howitzer built by Krupp and first used in 1914, could throw a shell weighing nearly a ton, that's 1,000 kgs, almost 10 kilometers away. And it flattened supposedly impregnable Belgian fortresses in the days. By the Second World War, the scale had grown even further. Germany's Schwer Gustav railway gun fired a 800mm shell, the largest caliber weapon ever used in combat, requiring a purpose-built rail line and thousands of personnel just to operate. That era of artillery was about brute, almost absurd scale. Here is the contrast, worth holding in your head for the rest of this episode. Pakistan's artillery corps did not start anywhere near that scale. It started with almost nothing at all. When British India split in 1947, the old Royal Indian Artillery was divided between the two new dominions, and Pakistan's inheritance by its own account was thin almost to the point of being merely symbolic. 8 gun units, 1 survey battery, a single air observation post flight, and 2 formation headquarters. The paramilitary Frontier Corps added 6 37-inch howitzers and 15 25-pounder guns on top of that. As you can just see, they're relics from the Second World War. That is the entire artillery arm Pakistan went to war with just weeks later in Kashmir. What that inheritance lacked in hardware, it partly made up for it in people. The units Pakistan received were built around a core of veteran mountain gunners, men who'd been tempered through years of frontier operations and combat in Africa, the Middle East, Italy, and Burma during the Second World War. That distinction, thin on guns, deep on experienced gunners, shaped how the young corps fought its first war. In the 1947-48 Kashmir War, Pakistani artillery played a genuinely decisive role in many documented episodes. In December 1948, as Indian forces pushed offensive operations in the Bhimber sector, Pakistan's High Command authorized what internal planning documents from the period called a modified Little Venus, a sustained two-day heavy artillery bombardment of the Beri Patan sector without an accompanying infantry assault. That shelling disrupted Indian supply convoys moving along the Akhnur-Nowshera road badly enough that Indian offensive operations in that sector stopped. Barely 2 weeks later, on 30th December 1948, Pakistan's general headquarters received a ceasefire request signal from the Indian side, and the war formally ended on the 1st of January 1949. That's not a claim that artillery alone won or ended the war. A great many factors were in play across a much wider conflict. But it's a genuine documented instance of a numerically tiny, poorly equipped Pakistani artillery arm using concentrated firepower to shape an Indian operational decision in the very first year of the Corps' existence. The School of Artillery was established at Nowshera Cantonment that same year, and Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah personally visited it in 1948. Through the early to mid-50s, the Corps went through multiple reorganizations, and on 23rd March 1956, the day Pakistan adopted the first constitution, it dropped every reference to the crown and was formally redesignated the Regiment of Artillery, adopting the American field artillery model. 18 guns to a regiment instead of old British pattern of 24 guns organized into 3 batteries of 6 guns. That US aligned doctrine and the organizational culture is a legacy still visible in the Corps today, even though the equipment base has long since diversified. The regiment's next major test came in September 1965 in the tank batteries around Chowinda and Sialkot sector, among the largest armoured engagements since the Second World War. Pakistani artillery provided genuinely effective covering introduction fire that helped blunt Indian armoured thrusts. 1965 is generally regarded on both sides of the border as the high point of the Corps' early institutional performance. 1971 is a bit harder, and this channel isn't going to soften it. In East Pakistan, the artillery arm, like the wider military effort in that theatre, was overwhelmed by Indian numerical superiority, a hostile militancy, and a campaign that ended within 2 weeks. Pakistan's own official institutional histories describe the regiment's 1971 performance as failing to produce effective results, and the defeat led directly to a serious period of internal reform. Revised doctrine, new courses, a harder look at coordination with maneuver forces that most accounts credit as origin of the Corps' modern professional culture. Kargil in 1999 earns the most complicated grade of the 3 because Pakistani artillery was decisive in 2 opposite directions at 2 different stages of the same war. Sitting only 173 kilometers from the Pakistani-controlled town of Skardu, Pakistani forces had strong logistical and artillery reach into the sector. And in the opening weeks, retired Indian gunnery officers have written candidly that Pakistan used the artillery, including the vintage 5.5-inch guns, hauled to extreme altitude, boldly and effectively to cover the infiltration of Northern Light Infantry troops and to interdict the Srinagar-Leh highway. While Indian forces initially attacked fortified positions with what those same Indian officers describe as inadequate artillery support of their own, Pakistani artillery has repeatedly shown real tactical skill at opening and shaping a fight and has repeatedly been tested hard once India commits its heavier gun inventory to a sustained counter-battery contest. Before we get into the SH-15 specifically, it is worth walking through the 3 broad families of artillery Pakistan has been fielding across its history, because each one trades off the same 3 things differently: firepower, protection, and mobility. So first we look at towed artillery. Towed artillery is a gun being towed by either a truck or a vehicle. Towed artillery guns like the M46, the M114, and the M198 155mm pieces still in Pakistani service is the oldest and simplest category. A gun on a wheeled carriage hauled into position by a truck or a tractor, then unhitched and dug into fire. The advantage is cost and simplicity, Towed guns are so cheap to build, cheap to maintain, and easy to produce in large numbers, which is why they still make up a large proportion of any army's gun inventory, including Pakistan's. The disadvantage is speed of displacement. Once a towed battery fires, it can take a well-drilled crew several minutes to hitch back and move, which is exactly the window a modern counter-battery radar can respond with enemy gunfire and hit back. Next, we come to the self-propelled artillery, the American M109 family that forms the backbone of Pakistan's current fleet. Along with the aging M110, mounts the gun directly onto a tracked armored chassis. You can think of this as a large tank with a giant gun on top of it. The crew is protected against shell fragments and small arms fire. The vehicle can fire and then displace and within seconds move away from its positions rather than minutes. And it can keep pace with advancing armor formations in shoot and scoot tactics. The trade-off is cost, weight, and mechanical complexity. Tracked self-propelled guns are expensive to build and expensive to maintain, and they need dedicated heavy transporters to move any real distance by road. Of course, being big and being tracked, they can go into some spaces where truck-mounted chassis and normal guns cannot go. And then we come to my favorite, the mountain artillery. This category gets forgotten in most combat discussions, but which has genuine roots in Pakistan's own institutional history. The mountain batteries that became part of Pakistan's founding artillery inheritance in 1947 traced back to units that first raised in the 1850s. Now, these were designed to be broken down into small parts and being carried up the mountains, passes where there are no roads, where there are no easy passes to take these guns onto high altitudes. So they were broken down into tiny little pieces and then were carried by mules and people. Now, these mules are not usual mules. They are raised and bred and trained to be able to carry these heavy loads, broken down pieces of guns onto really difficult terrain in Pakistan high altitude areas. Now, this is terrain that no wheeled vehicle can reach, the exact terrain that defines much of Pakistan's western and northern frontier, and large stretches of land in the line of control itself. These include the 3.7-inch mountain howitzer, the 75mm pack howitzer, and older 2.5-inch rifled muzzle-loader ammunition guns. Now, these weapons were standard for mountain batteries operating across the rugged northwest frontier, now KPK, and Gilgit-Baltistan, and even northern Kashmir. The trade-off is obvious: very light caliber, short range, and low volume of fire compared to the modern 155mm system. But genuinely unmatched ability to put a gun exactly where a truck or a tank just simply cannot go. Every modern army, Pakistan included, needed some mix of all three. And the story of the SH-15 is in a large part the story of Pakistan trying to find a fourth option that captures the best of the two at once. Now, here's the fact that should anchor this whole chapter. Every self-propelled gun Pakistan operated before the SH-15 topped out at 155mm 39 caliber at best, and most of the fleet sits at 155 23 caliber. The SH-15 is Pakistan's first ever 155 52 caliber gun system. Now, if you want to understand what is caliber, what is bore, and what is the length of the tube, and how does it affect how effectively a weapon fires and how it affects the range and the payload, put it in the comments and I'll make a chapter for you. This jump in barrel length alone is the difference between a gun that reaches roughly 30 kilometers and one with the right ammunition reaches past 50, even to 70 kilometers long. What makes the SH-15 specifically interesting from a doctrine standpoint is the chassis choice. Norinco, whose export designation is SH-15, while China's own military fields the identical system as PCL-181 on a Shaanxi 6x6 wheel truck. Now, this is a truck which has 6 tires, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 1 set in the middle, rather than a tracked unit. That is a deliberate splitting of the difference between 3 categories from the last chapter. It isn't as fast to displace or as protected as a tracked M109, but it's dramatically faster and cheaper to produce, and it can self-deploy on ordinary roads at a reported 90 kilometers per hour without needing any heavy transport. closer to the reach and simplicity of towed artillery, but without losing the shoot and scoot survivability that towed guns just cannot offer. Weighing around 25 tons with a crew of roughly 6, it carries an automated control system, hydraulic stabilizing legs for firing on the move without extensive setup, and a rate of fire in the range of 4 to 6 rounds per minute. Now, with the legacy systems Pakistan has been fielding, the gunner has to manually operate dials into changing the azimuth and the angle at which the gun is firing. In the SH-15, it's an automated fire control system, so you just put in the coordinates you want to shoot at, and the gun will automatically position itself to the right angle and to the right range. Pakistan signed the original SH-15 contract with Norinco in 2019 for 236 units. Deliveries began in January 2022, and the type made its public debut at the Pakistan Day Parade that March. Confirmed sources indicate Pakistan has also secured a technology transfer arrangement to build SH-15 units locally at the HIT, which is the Heavy Industries Taxila, which, if it matures into full local production, would mark a real shift from importing complete Chinese systems towards co-producing them domestically. The SH-15 fleet grew fast around the May 2025 conflict. Pakistan's original order was for 236 units, with delivery starting in 2022, but as early as 2025, only a few dozen were believed to be forward deployed near the Indian border. By the time the ceasefire held, that number had jumped sharply, with estimates putting somewhere around 250 SH-15s repositioned along the LOC and the international border, from the northern sectors down to south. Close to Pakistan's entire contracted fleet moved into forward positions in the space of months. That's roughly a 3 to 4-fold increase in guns near the border, and its deployment scale that sits at the heart of the controversy next covered. Now let's just pause for a minute and see why the 155mm caliber specifically has become the near universal NATO and NATO adjacent standard, because that's the whole reason the SH-15's induction matters as much as it does. A 155mm artillery shell sits at the genuine sweet spot, heavy enough to deliver a serious high explosive payload. A standard round carries several kilograms of explosive filler in a roughly 45 kg shell, while keeping itself light enough for a 6-man crew to handle by hand under field conditions, and for a gun of manageable size and weight to fire it accurately. And the 155mm family isn't one shell, it is an entire ammunition ecosystem. Standard high explosive rounds for area suppression, smoke rounds for concealment, illumination rounds for night operations, and critically, extended range rounds, rocket assisted projectiles, and the VLAPs, or the velocity enhanced long range artillery projectiles. The VLAP family specifically, which uses a base bleed and rocket boost combination to extend the range dramatically beyond a conventional shell. In some reports, Pakistan separately ordered over 1,300 VLAP rounds from Norinco under a 2017 contract, reportedly including technology transfer to build the shells domestically. Which is why the SH-15's headline range figures span such a wide band, roughly 20 to 40 kilometers with conventional ammunition, stretching to a reported 53 to 72 kilometers with VLAP rounds loaded. That range flexibility from one gun and one crew is what makes the modern 155mm 52 caliber system so much more versatile than the fixed, shorter reaching inventory it's replacing. The leap is really generational. Now, we must treat every figure in this chapter as an open source estimate. Nobody outside GHQ or Delhi has a confirmed order of battle, and public trackers disagree with each other's by dozens of units. Pakistan's self-propelled fleet is still dominated by the American M109 family, which estimates running past 400 vehicles across the M109A2, the more modern M109A5, and the Italian-sourced M109L. The bulk of it was second-hand stock acquired from the 1980s through the 2000s. Against that legacy fleet, the SH-15 contract of 236 units, with open source reporting suggesting somewhere in the range of 250 units, deployed forward by 2026, represents Pakistan's first real generational leap in self-propelled range and precision. On the Indian side, The comparison's point is the K9 Vajra T, the Indian-built variant of South Korea's K9 Thunder, also a 155-52 caliber system. India inducted an initial 100 units between 2018 and 21, ordered 100 more in a contract finalized in December 2024, with deliveries running into 2028, bringing the confirmed total to 200. And by mid-2028, Indian Defence Reporting was discussing a further proposal of over 300 additional units, which would make the eventual fleet past 500. Layer on top of that, India's Dhanush towed 155 45 caliber system, with roughly 114 guns ordered and induction expected to complete by 2026. The honest truth is that Pakistan's SH-15 closed a real capability gap that opened when India first fielded the K9 Vajra. But India's own 52 caliber fleet is scaling faster and from a larger base, which is the core argument behind the reported push towards local mass production of the SH-15 and possibly in future the SH-16 also. Now, the conflict itself, where artillery was central from the first night to the last, the crisis traces back to 22nd April 2025 in the Pahalgam attack, which killed at least 26 tourists in the Indian administered Kashmir. In the tense weeks that followed, cross-border fighting across the line of control escalated sharply, and on the night of 7th and 8th May, Pakistan forces were reported using small arms and artillery fire across the LOC opposite Akhnur, Kupwara, Barmala and Uri, and Poonch sector taking the heaviest hit. India launched Operation Sindoor on May 7th, striking multiple locations inside Pakistan and Pakistan administered Kashmir. Pakistan's response came on 10th May, Operation Bunyan-un-Marsoos, named after the Quranic verse describing a solid, firmly joined structure, with the Pakistan artillery dealing the big blows throughout the exchange with the SH-15 at the center. The operation combined precision-guided long-range Fatah-1 and Fatah-2 rockets, Pakistan Air Force precision munitions, long-range loitering munitions, and what ISPR specifically described as precision long-range artillery striking 26 military targets across India. Now, senior commentators and analysts have said that the volume of artillery ordnance Pakistan expended and dropped over India during the 4 days of Bunyan-un-Marsoos exceeded what was fired in the 1965 and 1971 wars combined. Now, this rings true given the sheer volume of precision-guided rocket artillery and loitering munitions ISPR itself described using in the 4-day conflict. Comparing this to weeks-long conventional gunfire duels in 1965 and the months of grinding conflict in 1971. Now, what supports this argument is the outcome. A ceasefire was agreed on 10th May following military contact between the two militaries alongside active American diplomatic engagement. The Stinson Center's 4 days in May assessment and multiple contemporary reports describe US officials, including the Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in extensive contact with both capitals during the negotiations. It would be an overstatement to credit artillery alone with forcing that ceasefire. A 4-day exchange involving air power, missiles, diplomatic pressure from Washington, it doesn't reduce to a single arm of service. But Pakistan's ability to sustain fire salvos and credible counter battery with long-range rocket artillery fire throughout the exchange was a genuine part of the operational picture that shaped how both sides in Washington read the state of the conflict at the time that ceasefire call was made. Now, the SH-15 controversy specifically because it runs in two directions at once. One about deployment numbers and one about performance. By 2025, open source trackers and satellite imagery accounts had spotted dozens of SH-15s positioned within roughly 80 kilometers of the Indian border, ahead of the conflict, already read at the time as a deliberate show of force. Reporting since the ceasefire has described a considerably larger picture. Intelligence sources estimates cited by Indian outlets put the post-conflict figure at roughly 250 SH-15s systematically repositioned along the entire eastern frontier. From the northern to the southern sectors, it is characterized as one of the largest conventional artillery reinforcements by Pakistan in years, and covered with a tone of genuine alarm about what a 50-plus kilometer range gun system means for the population centers and military infrastructure along the line of control. What is independently verifiable is that the pre-conflict SH-15 presence along the border in dozens near the border, the post-conflict presence is roughly double, triple, or even quadruple or even more. Chinese SH-16 development is real and would be a logical next evolution of Pakistan's wheeled artillery fleet on its own merits, independent of the proven combat record of the SH-15. Pull the threads together and here's the picture heading into the next several years. The range gap with India that opened when the K9 Vajra entered into service is closing very fast, not widening. The SH-15 gave Pakistan its first 155mm 52 caliber gun, and whatever the true performance record turns out to be, the direction of travel is correct. Wheeled, long range, rocket-assisted round-capable artillery replacing decades-old 23 and 39 caliber systems, which May 2025 demonstrated is not a hypothetical reinforcement. Watch the local production question closely. Once the reported technology transfer to heavy industries Texila matures into genuine domestic manufacturing of SH-15 and potentially SH-16 units, that materially reduces Pakistan's exposure to any future supply disruption. A lesson that the institution learned the hard way from the American arms embargo of 1965 and the Pressler amendments, and watched the doctrinal shift towards guided rocket artillery Fatah 1, Fatah 2 and the A-100, which Bunyan-un-Marsoos showed Pakistan willing to use for genuine deep strike, precision counter-battery work, and not just LOC area suppression. A real evolution from the Corps' historical role as a close support arm towards something closer to an independent strategic strike capability. The lesson from the past 3 decades is that Pakistan's guns have repeatedly excelled at opening a fight and causing decimation to the point the adversary has rushed to ceasefires. Is exactly the scenario a properly produced SH-15 and potentially the SH-16 fleet is meant to finally reinforce. May 2025 was the first real test of that correction in process. It wasn't the last time these two gun parks will face off each other across the line of control. And from the hue and cry being raised from the Indian media and defense circles, it is quite clear which side this correction will favor. That is all from Radar Mode this week. If this episode gave you a clearer picture on Pakistan's artillery corps and where it's headed, like the video, subscribe to Pakistan Connect, and share it with someone who needs to see this. Share your comments, tell us what you think, what we missed, and what you want us to cover next. My name is Qasim and you've been watching Radar Mode on Pakistan Connect. Stay informed, stay sharp, keep your Radar Mode on, and I'll see you all next week.